a long way to walk. Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. I was really surprised to get the phone call from Steve asking me to participate, since I've been sort of retired for a few years. Still doing geospatial stuff, still working with OGC membership, still working on standards. But guess what? I'm not going to talk about standards. And Steve, if you could start my presentation. So, what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about my almost 50 years enjoying this discipline. Got it. I've really enjoyed my entire career as a geographer. I am a trained geographer, and in the geospatial technologies industry. It's always amazed me that what all of you out there and all the other users of this technology have managed to accomplish in the last 50 years. An incredible breadth of applications, uses. I mean, just about everybody now uses their mobile phone for navigation, right? Well, all the basic foundational disciplines and technologies came out of the GIS industry that allows Google Maps or MapQuest or Yahoo Maps or whatever to actually work. So the user community is huge. Back when I started, I didn't even know there was such an industry. I didn't learn about that until I went to graduate school. By the time I went to graduate school, there may be a few thousand users in the entire world using what we might call today as GIS. So this is more of a, first we give ourselves a pat on the back before I get into some historical things and so forth. 500,000 US jobs, more than the airline industry in the United States, from a study by the Boston Group. Over 4 million direct jobs worldwide. That's people actually using digital geospatial technologies. That's a huge industry. Geospatial services companies drove 1.6 trillion in revenue in the United States. It seems like a big number, but if you look at all the industries and all the groups using geospatial technology, it's huge. The National Reconnaissance Office, one of those three-letter acronyms, intelligence agencies in Washington alone spends $4 or $5 billion a year. We don't really know, it's all black. And there are the URLs. These slides will be available, so I did put a bunch of URLs scattered through this presentation. So now that we've patted ourselves on the back, we're going to think about the history, lessons learned, some key critical things right now that we need to address in our energy, and then my thoughts maybe on what some of the interesting future trends are. This is a quote that just came out of a recent article in a webzine. A guy named Jay Perini, he's from Middlebury College. I know there's somebody here from Vermont. The United States of amnesia. And I thought that was really apropos. A place where history is often lost here in the United States and in every country. Things get rewritten, people lose things. I think about all the documents I had when I was in graduate school, and I lost many of them over the years. Like when you move, you just throw them all out. Well, that's history being lost. And unless people keep track of it, you don't understand the foundations of disciplines such as GIS and where it came from. Oh yeah, what is the most important year in the geospatial technologies industry ever? All the way back to when we first thought about using computers, or even earlier. Anybody? And it's not got anything to do with Google. It doesn't have anything to do with any of the big companies. Nobody has a guess? Anybody go to Woodstock? The year Woodstock was. Anybody remember that year? 69. Why? This is my hypothesis. It's what I feel. But it's the birth of the internet. October 29th. The birth of Unix. And later Linux. Esri was founded. Intergraph was founded laser scanning. Now when spatial was found. SimView was released out of the Harvard Computer Graphics Lab. Anybody here use SynApp? Any SynApp users? Oh my gosh, I am showing my age. Ian McCard released his book, Design with Nature, where he talked about map overlay and how important it was for us to do analytics, look at trends and patterns, and much more, including Woodstock, the moon landing, and the big peace marches against the Vietnam War in Washington, D.C. So a whole lot happened, and I actually wrote a whole article on this. There are actually dozens of other inventions and innovations that happened in 1969. Without any of these, like especially that first one, we wouldn't have the geospatial technologies deployment that we have today. And that's the internet, the first day of the internet. Within a month, somebody was trying to hack it. Seriously, I was at a presentation at Intergraph, and the keynote speaker was one of the founders of the internet. He was a graduate student at the time, and he talked about the first hack attempt. It was by the Russians. So they're consistent, right? So this is also my observation, but I want you to think about this. And this is one of the reasons why what we all do is so important. And why it brings value to users, policymakers, and other consumers of map data and geospatial technology. Every event, every observation, everything we do happens somewhere. In this day and age, because it happens somewhere, because of the mobile devices you carry around, you leave a track. So we know about all that information about where you are all the time and what you're doing. Because every time you use an ATM, every time you use your chip reader card, every time it's taking your location. That's something important to think about, and what I will address a little later when I talk about issues like privacy. So every decision we make has a location geographic element. Some of them are really important decisions, right? I want to buy a house, where do I want to buy it? I want a job, where do I want to live? I'm getting married, where's my honeymoon? That's really important. So these are just some of the questions that people are constantly asking themselves. And again, now they're looking at using technology to help them make these decisions. So again, GIS, geospatial technologies, location is an integral part of all of these decisions. And as we all know as practitioners, geography is a great integrator. It allows you, because you have important reference systems and everything's tied to some sort of reference frame, you can bring it all together and mash it all up and present it in new and really innovative ways for decision support. So we need geographic context and location information in all the decisions we make. And this is an interesting one here. The big hot topic of discussion in the OGC right now is how do you provide standard-based solutions for augmented reality into mobile devices. So, but along the way there are many historical misconceptions. History of GIS, I got this off of the university website. Not to point my finger at educators. But again, even educators, because of things getting lost in time, quite often misrepresent what the history and background of our discipline is. No fault of their own. GIS is generally said to have emerged in the 1980s. Maybe. Depends on how you define it. But that's really wrong, because back in the 70s, groups compiled listings and references of spatial data handling and geospatial technologies and automated mapping. They had lots of different names for them. This one was done by the International Geographical Union for the United States Geological Survey. I helped write it, so I know that there are hundreds of these computer-based systems back then for doing what we do today, just a lot more primitive. And this one is when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wanted to build a GIS for environmental mitigation related to coal strip mining. They said, look out what's out there, see if there's anything we can use for our application or get ideas from to build a new one. And that's where that report came from. Your tax dollars at work. Try to find these documents in a library. They exist, but they're very, very, I have copies in my garage. I was going to bring them with me, but they're too fat and heavy. So I was lazy. So anyway, when I got to thinking about this, and it's always hard in the keynote speech to think about what we talk about, what's relevant. So I said, maybe, if you think of GIS, and I make the statement that I really don't think it started in the 80s. I think it started a lot sooner, a lot earlier. Not sooner, sooner would be that it was like 2000. No, like maybe 2,000 years ago, some of this stuff started. So there's the foundations of GIS, and I think this is critical. One of the things that I've run into in dealing with many, many different groups over the years is how many people using GIS do not understand the foundational elements and requirements and technologies that underpin our discipline. You go to I'm not picking on the open source community, but you go to an open source developer and say, I need to talk about the data you're using and the characteristics of the ellipsoids and the impacts. It's going to go whoosh. So, anyway, quite often the foundations are not adequately taught. And there are a whole lot of reasons for that. You don't have time, you don't have the resources. Maybe it gets delayed until you're a graduate student and you pick all this up. But a lot of these things that are underpinning our technology, and I can tell you that there are employers out there that really like people who understand these things. They don't want the tool. Forget the tool. Anybody can learn to run a tool if they know these things. And what you're getting from some of the big employers is they need people that know these things, and then how to apply it. And then you can learn the tool. So this has been sort of a discussion within the OGC of all places, because the membership that represents government, industry, universities, trying to figure out how to better, if the information's there, there are courses and university programs that are really, really strong in here. How do you propagate that everywhere? Anyway, geography, cartography, geodesy, remote sensing, photogrammetry, the predictive analytics. All of these have been around for a really long time. I'd like to look at each of them. The science of geography is likely the oldest of all the sciences. Anybody disagree with that? Goes way, way, way back. I like to think of geography as the mother of all sciences, because the discipline is inherently human. We always think about location. You live in the three-dimensional, four-dimensional. Losing my voice, I need some water. I usually don't do that. Must be my rush to lunch. Ooh, lots of water. There's a belief now that early humans wandering out of the African continent drew maps in the sand. So you're going back hundreds of thousands of years potentially. And that's what I mean by inherently human. We think spatially. You want to convey information geographically. So maps have always been really, really important. Yeah, geography? I don't know whoever came up with that term, but when it came out, it was like, are you kidding me? It's a bunch of blah, blah, blah. Without meaningful content. Geography is geography. There is no such thing as a new geography. I just had to put that in there. There's a reason for that. I'll get to that later. Cartography, another fundamental element of what we do in our discipline. How do you visualize the information? How do you convey it? Now we're looking at all kinds of really cool virtual reality, augmented reality, 3D, immersive technologies. Boy, I wish the early map makers would have loved those. Would have been witchcraft to them. The science and practice of drawing maps. There's evidence of maps dating back almost 9,000 years in cave drawings. Drawing of cities, streets, parcel maps. Parcel mapping goes back a long way because land ownership's always been important. And then the first known portable map. Here's a mobile map, the first one. 2300 BCE. So they've been around a long time. And then they get really fancy. This is an example from 1482 of a really famous map that after about 1,000 years of not really good map making, it picked up again in the 15th century. And it's based on Ptolemy's geography and a map projection. Not bad. 600 years ago. Geodesy. Any geodesists here? Oh dear. Geodesy, the science of accurately measuring and understanding the Earth's geometric shape, orientation in space, and gravity field. A really early example was Aristophanes, back quite a long time ago, 2,500 years. And he measured, and he was looking at the size of the Earth. And a lot of the basic things that he and other early geodesists understood was how to deal with measurement of a spherical object in space. And modern geodesy obviously has evolved significantly from that. But geodesy underpins all map making. Even today, with drones flying all over the place, you still need to know about geodesy. And it has lots of important implications. Like, for example, and I learned this from Shell Oil. We sold them, this is back in the Genesis days, they were going to deploy a GIS worldwide, but they did a really, really rigorous analysis of how you handled coordinate reference systems and projection transformations. I asked them why. They said, well, when you're doing directional drilling, and if your coordinate is off X, like an inch, at the drill head, and you're going down miles, you could be hundreds of feet off from where you want to be and miss the reservoir completely. So geodesy has real-world implications at a very fundamental level. And it's going to get even more interesting around 2020 when the new North American datum goes into effect as the legal datum for America, which includes dynamic datums because the Earth is shifting. Remote sensing's been around a long time. May have been earlier than this, but this is the first known case. Remote sensing essentially is just measuring from a hands-off observation platform. There's a nice oblique image. Of course, because of remote sensing and people taking pictures from balloons, photogrammetry becomes important. Photogrammetry is the science and technology of obtaining reliable information from non-contact imaging and other sensor systems. I was really fortunate in the early 80s to work for a photogrammetric engineering firm named Autometric. They did everything in digital, not analog. So I learned a lot about photogrammetry. And photogrammetry actually sort of almost died out as a professional discipline until drones came along. The transformation of imagery from drones and LiDAR requires photogrammetric processes. Predictive analytics. It's been around a long time too. Probably many of you have heard of this, but this goes back to 1854, a little more modern than some of the other technologies. Where John Snow mapped public wells, they were looking for the source of color. So he generated an incidence map and analyzed that incidence map to predict where the highest probability well was that was causing the cholera outbreak. And they were able to quickly identify it and shut it down, and the cholera epidemic at that time disappeared. So there's a cyclical nature history also. I mean, I was just talking about some of the fundamental disciplines that have been around in the geospatial technologies industry for a very, very long time. Every GIS today uses principles, techniques, mathematics, whatever, from those disciplines. So no new inventions there, just new ways of doing things. So another thing to think about in our discipline, and obviously GIS is heavily, heavily grounded in information technologies. You can't get away from it. And a lot of the big major advances in geospatial technologies have nothing to do with geography or geodesy or photogrammetry or cartography. All those things still remain the same until in terms of their fundamental characteristics. What's changed is all the technology that we use to implement these things. So what's interesting is, mainframe back in the 60s. I worked on mainframe. Then we went to client server, then we went to centralized, then we went to distributed. And along the way, they keep changing the name, even though the architectures are almost identical. We'll get to that. So what? Well, basic IT architectures and concepts have not changed since the 1960s. I learned to program on the Dartmouth time sharing system, although I was at Middlebury, Vermont. We could dial in. Well, that's client server, folks. I had a dumb client. I have a picture that I skipped over way earlier. It was an ASR 33 teletype at 300 baud. And it was interactive. So I could sit there and write my basic program and run it, and it would tell me where I screwed up, and I could reprogram it. And then I generated line printer maps of weather data. But anyway, that was a pretty, when you look at it, it's like, that's nothing. When you think about the 60s, and what the machines looked like back then, a huge room like this for a computer to service 500 people. It was pretty significant technology. But the architecture is really no different than what we're doing today. It's just that our clients today are these things, which have, you've probably heard this, have more power than a Cray 1 supercomputer. And getting more and more powerful. So there's an evolution of these architectures based on the underpinning technology. The wonderful thing for our discipline is we just ride along and take advantage of these new information technologies. So we went from the old days of many Unix servers on a wide area network with X Windows terminals to now cloud environments. I don't know how many of you are using the cloud. I know it was generally here from Amazon. But a lot of organizations are going to the cloud, like the federal government. They like the elasticity and the flexibility and everything that goes along with cloud computing. And then what's next? That's evolving now. I've got a slide on that. What's the next step in this evolution? And again, geospatial technologies, because it's a fundamental discipline, and because of the way it's always been, it really just takes advantage. And by the way, geospatial technology companies and users tend to be early adopters. You may not think of yourselves as early adopters. You might say, I'm really conservative, blah, blah, blah. But actually, the geospatial technologies discipline overall and historically has been an early adopter of a lot of these technologies. Probably because we have so much data. We want to do really powerful things with it. So anyway, I mentioned what it used to look like. Anybody recognize that graphics terminal? You did little green squiggle lines on it. It was monochrome. That's a Tektronix 4010. I programmed one of those for a number of years till I got a 4014, and it was like wonderful because it was a big screen. That's an IBM system from the late 60s. And today, we have all the same things. Instead of an ASR 33 teletype or whatever, we've got high-resolution smartphones with cameras better than anything you could buy back in the 80s. with huge capabilities, fast approaching probably, I would guess, shortly you'll be able to put a terabyte of storage in the smartphone. Programming languages, interesting enough, look pretty much the same. They haven't, I mean, you can do a lot more with them. And you have other constructs and so forth that you didn't have back in the 60s. But if you look at BASIC from the 1960s and compare it to Java or JSON or some of the other, like Python, there are a lot of similarities. And it doesn't change that much. And of course, the old mainframe system, this is from a Google, I don't know how anybody got a picture of it because they don't like people taking pictures of their massive warehouses. So, cloud computing. Now the reason, there's sort of been a little message under all this. A lot of the architectures and a lot of the basics have remained the same. Yet they keep putting new names on it. It's the marketing people get in there and they say, we really need to give this a new name so we can sell lots of X, even though it's not that much different from what happened a couple of years before. So, interesting cartoon, good old Dilbert. And so, I guess this is just a point that history repeats itself. And people have to come up with new names for architectures and so forth that we've sort of actually had for a really long time, but we now have new technological capabilities that we didn't have before. This is not dim in the cloud. The cloud is an amazing technology, and it's finally realized its potential. When it first came out, there was a lot of hype, and a lot of people were saying, man, they never work, blah, there are no standards, blah. But now it's fully mature. And the same is true in a certain sense with GIS and geospatial technologies. All these things I mentioned before are still fundamental to our discipline. And if you don't understand the fundamentals, it's really tough to defend what we're providing. Geospatial technologies, the fundamentals have not changed, but the underlying technology sure has. And I think, as I've said before, our industry is going to keep leveraging all the latest technologies to the benefit of our constituents, our users, our policymakers. And I've said this before, GIS technologies have always been at the forefront of using the latest, newest, and best technologies. Big data analytics. I was on a conference call 6 or 7 years ago. The White House had convened a working group, special interest group on big data in the federal government. And the guy who was running the meeting was saying, well, you know, this big data is really new, blah, blah, blah. We really got to get our arms around it. I'm listening to all this, and I said, right, you know, really got to get our arms around it. And then I raised my virtual hand and said, well, do you realize that the geospatial industry has been dealing with big data, like NASA, since Landsat went up? And the oil and gas industry has been dealing with big location-enabled data called seismic surveys since they started doing major seismic surveys. So big data has been around a long time. It just took people a long time to put a name on it. And a whole new bunch of marketing, right? Oops, it's a good one. So, again, getting back to the fundamentals, it's important to understand that there's been a consistency in our discipline. Unlike some other disciplines that constantly change, we're more like the finance industry. Good accounting practices haven't really changed in a long time, which is good. And these are just some examples of documents and conferences from the 70s where a lot of the fundamental aspects, algorithms, mathematics, so on and so forth for our industry were documented. And they haven't changed. The one on topological data structures was at the MIT Endicott House, funded by U.S. Census, United States Geological Survey, and one other federal agency, NASA. And it was to look at topological data structures and spatial indexing and all that kind of good stuff. And if you look at any of the technologies you're using today, there's probably not one spatial indexing algorithm or one approach to topology that isn't in that document. It's actually 4 documents. Try to get a copy of that. And the same with these others. So they're great historical documents. They really talk about the fundamentals of our discipline at a very early stage, and yet they're still appropriate and apropos today. So now a little bit about what I see as some of the real interesting problems facing our industry today. It's going to take the creativity and innovation and abilities of the practitioners in our discipline to deal with. Obviously, there's the evolution from 2D, 3D, 4D, 5D. That's movement over space-time, it's 5D. Fluid dynamics. Provenance, data quality, uncertainty, privacy, legal. We all know about this. Right now, everybody is really concentrated on 3D because of LiDAR and the ability to collect massive amounts of 3D content and all the amazing tools that are available to process that. 6 months ago, I was out and I took a bunch of pictures of one of my granddaughters riding a horse, and I was going around in a circle, and they got loaded up to Google Photos in the cloud, and I went back to look at them a couple days later, and it had generated a panoramic scene of my granddaughter riding in the circle, but as a plan view. How the heck did it do that? Anyway, so there's a lot of concentration on this, and a lot of the standards work is focused on 3D, but also more and more on 4D, the time element. How do you deal with time? How do you provide standardized ways of talking about time? How do you display time? How do you display 3D data over time, which is what this thing is. That's the jet stream over Canada. Provenance. You all heard about metadata. But provenance is something that's really, really important, especially as we gather and collect and process larger and larger and larger amounts of geospatial content and try to fuse it with other data sources for enhanced decision making. And there's actually a data model now for provenance. There's a W3C standard for encoding provenance data. The geospatial stuff inside there is from ISO 19115, which is metadata, spatial metadata. So it's just like a piece of art in the art world. If you're going to buy it, you want to see the provenance. In the geospatial industry, people really need to see the provenance to make sure they're using the right data for the job at hand. Fit for purpose, fit for use. There are all kinds of ways that people talk about it, but provenance is something that has not been historically collected. Which is interesting because today, especially, more and more of the information we collect is from sensors. All these sensors, most of the sensors, collect all kinds of metadata, including provenance information, which is all about the calibration of the instrument, when it was last checked for quality and things like that. And it's all there, it just somewhere gets lost in the workflows. So provenance is really important for legal purposes. I haven't gotten legal yet. But it's also related to data quality. Provenance is one aspect of data quality. And again, it gets to are the data fit for the intended uses and operations and decision making and planning. They're all elements I'm sure this is something all of you worry about on a day-to-day basis. And there are actually groups and programs, especially in Europe, looking at standardized ways of visualizing data quality so that an end user, when they get a map display on the screen, it could be a little radio dial or color flashing. Green is good for what you want to use it for. Red is bad. Don't use it. Spatial uncertainty, another aspect of quality, something that tends to get overlooked, especially when you start using data collected from these mobile devices, say in an emergency response situation or a 911 call. Anyway, spatial uncertainty, fundamental requirement for robotics and autonomous vehicles. The entire autonomous vehicle industry, embedded deep in the bowels of all their software, are things that deal with spatial uncertainty. And a lot of them go back to a seminal paper by Smith and Cheeseman on the topic out of NASA and SRI. They wrote this back in the 80s. So there's a lot of mathematics in there about dealing with spatial uncertainty. But it's critical to estimates of confidence, again. Whether or not a piece of data or a set of data is good to use for what you're trying to use it for. Or, for example, if I call, there's a whole program out there called Next Generation 911. Some of you may be involved with it if you deal with emergency call centers, PSAPs, and so forth. That there's a lot of discussion about how do you express uncertainty of a location provided from a mobile device. The Next Generation 911 is all about allowing people, because not using landlines anymore to call 911, so how do you validate the location of your mobile device? And how certain are you that the location being expressed from that mobile device is any good? Or what is its fuzzy ellipse of certainty? And they need to know that. When police go out, they need to know sort of what they're getting themselves into. And obviously, it's also extremely critical for intelligent transportation systems. Privacy, this is a big one for me, hopefully for many others. I was first introduced to the privacy issue at a ERISA conference back in the early 90s, where a gentleman from Ames, Iowa stood up and talked about, they had put up a really, had to be late 90s, a really, really good early 2000s. It's one of those things that escaped me. I get the message though, I forget the date. It was a web deployment of their GIS database. All the different layers where they didn't worry about confidential information were put up and made available to the citizens via the web. And they thought that was a great thing until they found out that pedophiles were able to fuse data across multiple layers provided in a publicly accessible system to determine where at-risk kids were, if they could track or solve whatever. So they had to take it down and figure out a better way to make that information available and protect the individual citizens from bad actors. And that was a lesson learned early. Another one was people's day-to-day movement is usually so predictable that even anonymized location data can be linked to individuals with relative ease with correlated with other pieces of information, which is basically what the GIS manager from Ames, Iowa was talking about. Except today, it's everybody. They can actually, Harvard and MIT did a study. They got a whole bunch of location movement information from one of the big telecommunications providers. And they did some predictive modeling And they could, for about 94 to 96% accuracy, predict the movements of any individual on a daily basis. We're extremely predictable, folks. Now we're even more predictable, and they can predict where you will be tomorrow and the next day. So there are some real privacy issues. We can be constantly tracked through your mobile devices, even when the GPS is switched off. The phone companies know which cell tower you're near. So they can still track you. It's much coarser, more confidence. So simply by looking at the data, say from a Fitbit, what they can find out is pretty good accuracy is what your gender is, whether you're tall or short, whether you're heavy or light. What's really most intriguing is they can be 100% guaranteed to be identified simply by your gait, how you walk. That's Fitbit data. That's the guy, used to be the CTO of the CIA, Gus Hunt, real interesting individual, with a lot of insights into predictive analytics and human behavior, as you would guess from the CIA. So you combine stuff like that. I don't know if any of you use Strava, so I do for cycling. There was a big brouhaha over that because they could generate heat maps of which identified collection points for certain running and cycling activities. So this whole privacy thing gets down to, I think the biggest thing is the location tracking. And then, oh gosh, yesterday on NPR, they had a technology section on real-time facial recognition. And the fact that there are companies like Amazon, which I was surprised, I didn't realize they had the software, selling this capability to law enforcement. Think about that. Well, they can track you, they can predict your movements, and get lots of other location information. And by the way, now that I know where you're going to be kind of at a certain time tomorrow, I can turn on my real-time facial recognition software. Oh, there you are, and track you in real time. There are movies, science fiction movies that show those capabilities while they're real. So, privacy is something I think, in terms of geospatial data, is something we all as professional practitioners in this industry need to be very, very aware of. There's huge potential for misuse. I don't think any of us here would like to see that, because we see all the good that it does, all the positive contributions, but it would only take a few bad actors, associated with the DoD community to long, but some DoD actors, bad actors out there, and there could be all in the best of guidance or consideration, whatever you want to color it with, but it can be used to really improve the lives of citizens. So just something to be aware of. Legal. This gets back to privacy, because if something bad or a perception of badness happens with the use of location data, say for tracking, and the politicians decide they got to do something, but they don't understand the technology at all, and they tend to make decisions, not quite sure sometimes, but not necessarily based on the best of science or facts or technology or the people who are groups that provide expert opinions. They may tend to ignore that and make decisions that really, really impact our industry in a negative way. So this is from a set of slides from a guy named Kevin Pomper, who specializes in spatial law. That's what he does. His company, his law firm, specializes in spatial law. And he says that if certain legislative things are done based on a knee-jerk reaction to, say, privacy issues, these are some of the things that could happen to our industry, which would impact all of us. It can become a lot more expensive to do anything. Anybody here heard of the EU General Data Protection legislation? Went into effect this month. And it's to protect your data. This is all, it's all tied up in this argument about who owns your data. Does Google own your data, or do you own my data? Now we've seen all of that, trends and innovations, and so those are some of the things to be aware of. And because our industry's gotten so big, so good, actually very pervasive, those are some things that we have to worry about going forward as professionals. Sort of keep it in the back of your mind. But also there's some really cool things that are going on, which will make those other things even more critical to resolve. Oops. The Internet of Things. We've all heard of the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things has actually been around for quite a while. Back in 1981, Bureau of Fire Management Service in Alaska put in a lightning detection system to monitor lightning strikes to predict where they might have to look for a potential forest fire due to the concentration of lightning strikes. That's a really used radio for the observation equipment in the field to actually communicate back to the server that consolidated all the stuff. That was a really early Internet of Things, before most of us even thought there wasn't. Obviously now it's gotten much more pervasive. This is a IDC 2015 report talking about the Internet of Things in the year 2020. 4 billion people, $4 trillion in revenue, 25 million apps, 25 billion embedded intelligent systems, and 50 trillion gigabytes of data on a daily basis. All of it, when you think about it, because it's coming from sensors, unless they're really, really stupid sensors, has a location tag. Massive amounts of data. You get back to privacy, these are the things you got to worry about. When you all know when you download an app, it says, well, we want to get access to your contacts and you want location enabled, blah, 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 blah. Why do they need all that information? They don't. So anyway, that's edge computing. The next generation of client server. Edge computing, the edge refers to computing on the edge of the network closer to the data source. There's been a lot of discussion in the geospatial industry about this because quite often geospatial data sets are too massive to move across the internet. So you move the services to where the data. NASA does that a lot. That's an early instance of edge computing. But it's going to get even more pervasive because more and more sensors and other intelligent devices have a lot of local processing capability. Again, think of your smartphone and what you can do on your smartphone. There's a lot of this going on already in terms of in Europe. A lot of the citizen science application frameworks are using edge computing. So what it means in the GIS industry is, you know, you may be using the cloud, but you also have a lot of local data that needs to be processed before it's uploaded to the cloud. And you may be on your mobile device out in the field collecting stuff, and all the actual processing of your data is happening on your local device and it goes on the cloud. It may happen, you don't even know it. It could be in the sensor, it could be in the phone, it could be in the tablet. Machine learning, artificial intelligence. We all hear this almost every day in the news. AI has been around. We used in the mid-'80s, we were using neural networks for pattern recognition and digital aerial imagery. So it's been around. The concepts have been around for a long time. It's really taken off in the last few years as more and more people get these little home things. I don't have one of these. I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to some of these technologies. But the big argument is it going to create a utopia or a dystopia? We're going to have Terminator, or are we going to have benefit to all humans on the planet, all ecosystems, all ecologies? We don't know. But the interesting thing, again, getting back to this cyclical nature of just calling things different names over time, I'm sure there's some remote sensing professionals in the room. Remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, doing training for classifiers? Yeah. Except it was a human doing the training. This little area is deciduous forest. This little area is broadleaf maple. So you trained it, and then you ran your classifier. Well, fast forward to this year. NASA and NGA are funding and sponsoring an initiative in the OGC and the latest testbed activity to do machine learning for classifying. So instead of the human doing the training sets, the machine goes out and learns from past things that have been uploaded. So it goes historically and looks at all the things that it has access to. In terms of NASA, those are huge archives of previously classified and processed remote sensing data. And then the machine trains to classify and remembers the results. So it's just gone from human to machine. No difference in the actual classifier. The fundamentals remain the same, just new technology. Fog computing. It becomes a fog in all this technology. Fog computing is you need an infrastructure that supports the communication between your cloud environment, your cloud provider, your cloud infrastructure with the edge, because it really doesn't exist right now. It's going to clog up the internet, and even 5G won't support it. So you need some sort of a intermediary piece of middleware. Hey, middleware. Middleware in the 80s. In the client-server environment, you had middleware that took care of all the communications broken and everything like that. Well, it's coming back again. Blockchains. All the blockchains? It's been in the news a lot. I don't know any Bitcoin. Anybody here on Bitcoin? Yeah, okay. You done well on your investment? But anyway, what's interesting for our technology area is that it doesn't need to be used just for the financial. It can be used for any asset. So if you're really worried about keeping information confidential or secure, there are a lot of organizations, geospatial technology companies, looking at blockchain as a way for encrypting geospatial resources, assets, to make sure nobody can ever crack them and get access to them. It could be for confidentiality, it could be because of value, any number of reasons. So that was my last slide. Thank you for attending this keynote. And again, this is just showing that machines for computing have been around a long time. This is the Charles Babbage difference engine. It's all analog, but it did differential calculus. And it's just interesting to see these things. And I'm going to go back really, really quickly because there's one thing that I skipped over. Here, take this all in, right? It's about 40 years. That was my first computer that I worked on. I just wanted to show you that back in '69. Steve did mention I programmed and did computer work in '69. Well, that's what BASIC looks like. That's an ASR33 teletype tied into the Dartmouth timeshare system. So with that, I thank you for your attention. Am I pretty much on time?
Carl, you did outstanding.
Are there any questions for Dr. Reed before he departs?
Well, I'm not departing. I'll be around.
Okay. Well, there you got it. So we're a little bit ahead of schedule here. So again, just opening the floor for any questions that anyone might have. What was your favorite project to work on, Carl?
My favorite project, oh gosh. Well, I've worked on a number of really interesting projects. There was one I couldn't talk about until just a few years ago, which was the cruise missile program. My favorite project was probably the 6 months we spent designing and implementing the first version of Gemini. That was all tied into the work we were doing with the Mark 90 program, which was at the time the DMA modernization program. So we had access to all this really, really cool technology and so forth. So it was really stimulating. A lot of long days, but really, really fun. Really enjoyed that. But a lot of other, there have been so many, I've been really blessed with a wonderful career in terms of people I've interacted with, projects I've worked on. It's just, I've been really lucky.
Okay, there's some students in the crowd. Your last tidbit would be items of wisdom for them in embarking on this as a career. I mean, we got a bunch of old white-haired men like you and I. They're the new generation. What would you tell them?
What would I tell the new generation? I can tell you that this is only, step back. It depends where you want to go with your career. What you need to know is different if you're going to go work for a digital globe versus maybe an Esri versus National Geospatial Intelligence Agency versus a university. They're all a bit different. But I think what's common in all of them are understanding the fundamentals. I can tell you right now, if you walk into a place like NGA or Digital Globe and don't know the fundamentals of your discipline, forget it. They just won't hire you. And then obviously what those fundamentals are depends on where you're going. So if you go to Digital Globe, they're going to want somebody probably that really, depends where in Digital Globe. They have an IT department, so you really got to know your IT fundamentals. And you may need, if you're a security specialist, really know your security. But if you're a remote sensing specialist, they really want you to know the latest and best in satellite technology and sensor technology. And so again, it gets back to just in general, know the fundamentals for the discipline you're going into and the job market that you're seeking. If you go in saying, I know tool XYZ, they're going to go, yeah, right.
Okay, thank you very much. We're, like I said, a little bit ahead to the degree that you've got a few more minutes. Would just like to wrap this up. Is there a question? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned, did you play a part in the original preferred launch from Digital Globe in any aspects?
Yeah, I think that,
Did you hear that?
yeah, not quite.
You had mentioned Digital Globe. Did you play any part in the development or any other aspects of the first quick bird launch?
Not the bird launch, but a guy named Harry Nedziatic and I were brought in as an outside independent reviewer of their technology architecture at the time. Assuming the satellite would have gone up successfully, how they dealt with all the flow of information through various workflows. That was involved in. By the way, Digital Globe is a Colorado company. Started just down 13 miles south of where I live. They've moved, they're a lot bigger now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Reed. A round of applause, if you would, please. And
I forgot to show this. This is a document from 1978 called Capabilities of a GIS. It was written for the Fish and Wildlife Service as part of the development of the map overlay statistical system. If you look, it has the language and functional definition in here. If you looked at it, it would look really feel really comfortable with it because every GIS technology we use today provides the same capabilities. So again, it's just underscoring that there's a certain foundational aspect that hasn't changed over the years with the technical underpinnings and the innovation it has. So again, thanks.